Do you mind?
The woman said sharply, already halfway into the aisle seat. I don't want my jacket wrinkled and... Her eyes flicked to his worn backpack, then to the child clinging to his sleeve. We're already cramped enough. She let the exhausted stranger sit beside her on the crowded flight, never imagining what he carried inside. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. People nearby watched, some with curiosity, others with thinly veiled judgment, as turbulence rattled the overhead bins and a flight attendant asked them to hurry. He didn't argue, didn't explain, just shifted his knees inward and guided his daughter gently into the window seat, his voice low and steady while the plane shuddered again. Because when the warning chime echoed and the cabin lights flickered, control would no longer belong to titles or tailored suits. This was never about a seat. It was about who stays calm when everything starts to fall. Man was Ethan Rowe, and he moved like someone who'd learned long ago how to take up less space than he deserved. The snapback came quietly. He buckled in without rushing, fingers practiced, checking the latch twice out of habit. When the woman beside him huffed and crossed her arms, he offered a polite nod and turned his attention fully to the small hand gripping his. Calm settled over him like muscle memory, unshaken by the glares or the rising whine of the engines. His daughter's breathing was quick, shallow. Flying always did that to her. He leaned closer, murmured reassurance, counted softly until her shoulders dropped. Outside the window, rain streaked across the glass, blurring the runway lights into long, trembling lines. The smell of recycled air and coffee hung heavy, and somewhere overhead, a panel creaked, metal complaining under pressure. Marianne Cole adjusted her seat again, clearly annoyed. First class had been overbooked. This was temporary. Everything in her life was supposed to be insulated from inconvenience. She glanced at the man beside her, noted the scuffed boots, the faded jacket, the way he watched the wing as if it were a living thing. Definitely not her world. The aircraft lurched as it taxied, harder than expected. A ripple of unease moved through the cabin. Bags thumped. A child cried 2 rows back. Ethan felt it immediately, a vibration just slightly off rhythm. His jaw tightened, not in fear, but in recognition. He exhaled slowly, grounding himself, and pressed his palm flat against the armrest, feeling the hum travel through the frame. Marianne rolled her eyes. It's just turbulence, she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. These planes are designed for worse. He didn't respond. He was listening. To the pitch of the engines, to the delay between acceleration and movement, to the subtle way the lights dimmed, then steadied, then dimmed again. His mind mapped patterns without permission, old pathways lighting, up after years of disuse. The seatbelt sign chimed. The captain's voice came on, smooth but a shade too deliberate. Routine words, rehearsed calm. Ethan had heard that tone before, in different skies, under very different circumstances. His daughter looked up at him, eyes wide. He smiled, small but certain, and squeezed her hand once. The plane turned onto the runway. Rain intensified, drumming against the fuselage. Engines spooled higher, a rising howl that set his teeth on edge. Something lagged. Not enough for panic, enough for notice. Marianne leaned back, closed her eyes, finally settling. Control, she thought. Order, schedules. She had a board meeting waiting, a merger call already queued. This flight was a minor inconvenience she would forget by morning. The wheels began to roll. Ethan's gaze locked forward, past the heads and screens and rows of strangers, toward a future narrowing fast. He counted again under his breath. Not for comfort this time, but for calibration. Around them, unaware, lives pressed forward on faith and habit, as the aircraft surged, then hesitated, just for a fraction of a second too long. He felt it in his bones. And he knew this flight was going to ask something of him he'd sworn he'd left behind. The hesitation passed, barely noticeable to anyone without years etched into their nerves. The plane pushed forward, speed climbing, rain streaking faster across the windows until the runway lights stretched into pale ribbons. A few passengers exhaled, tension easing as the familiar lift pressed them back into their seats. He didn't relax. The sound was wrong. Not loud, not dramatic, just a fraction lower than it should have been, like a note held too long. He tilted his head slightly, eyes still forward, listening past conversation, past the whir of cabin air, past the rustle of newspapers and the muted clink of a drink cart locking into place. Beside him, Marianne adjusted her seatbelt and finally glanced his way, irritation softening into mild curiosity. "First time flying?" she asked, voice clipped, polite enough to be dismissive. He shook his head once. No. That was all. The nose lifted. The ground dropped away. A ripple of applause started somewhere near the back, quickly dying out as the plane hit a pocket of rough air. The cabin dipped, rose, dipped again. A woman gasped. Someone cursed under their breath. The seatbelt sign chimed insistently. His daughter's fingers tightened around his. He leaned in, murmuring, steady as before. He didn't tell her everything was fine. He told her to breathe with him. In through the nose. Out slow. Count the lights along the aisle. Focus on what you can control. Marianne watched him do it. Watched the child's shoulders lower, the panic ease. Something about the way he spoke, measured, unhurried, pricked at her. Not soothing words. Commands disguised as comfort. The plane leveled briefly, then jolted harder than before. Overhead, bins rattled. A sharp, metallic clatter echoed somewhere above row 20. The flight attendant froze mid-step, hand gripping the cart. The captain's voice returned, still calm, but now threaded with effort. A minor delay, weather adjustment, nothing to worry about. He felt the correction come too late. His gaze flicked to the wing again. Rain lashed against it. But that wasn't what he was watching. It was the angle, the response, the way the aircraft seemed to think before it moved. Marianne frowned. "You look like you expect something bad to happen." He hesitated, just long enough to be honest without alarming. "I expect something complicated." She gave a short laugh. "Planes don't do complicated. They do what they're told." That almost made him smile. Another shudder ran through the cabin, stronger this time, followed by a brief dimming of the lights. A murmur spread, voices overlapping, anxiety rising like static. The engines surged, then steadied, then surged. Again. He felt it clearly now, not catastrophic, not yet, but trending the wrong way. A man across the aisle leaned forward. "Is this normal?" Before anyone could answer, the plane dipped again, sharper, forcing a collective cry from the cabin. The flight attendant abandoned the cart and grabbed the nearest seat back. Marianne's confidence wavered. She straightened, eyes darting toward the front. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, reaching for the call button, then stopping herself. Control meant not showing fear. She'd built a career on that. He didn't reach for anything. He grounded himself through the floor, through the vibration, through memory he rarely allowed to surface. Training rooms, simulators, real cockpits with less margin than this. He cataloged inputs automatically, a part of him waking up that had never truly slept. His daughter looked at him again. "Daddy?" "I'm here," he said. "Always." The captain's voice returned sooner than expected. Still, calm, less smooth, an instrument anomaly. Nothing passengers needed to worry about. They were monitoring the situation. Monitoring wasn't fixing. Marianne turned fully toward him now, unease finally breaking through her irritation. You seem awfully calm for someone in economy. He met her gaze for the first time, really met it. There was no challenge there, no need to prove anything, just truth. Panicking doesn't help. She searched his face, as if trying to place him somewhere that made sense. It didn't work. He didn't fit the categories she relied on. Another jolt hit, followed by a faint but unmistakable alarm tone from the front. Short. Cut off quickly. Around them, people shifted, whispered, prayed. The social order of the cabin began to dissolve, status meaningless against shared vulnerability. He leaned back, eyes closing for half a second, listening, calculating, remembering. And before what comes next unfolds, hit subscribe if you want to see how quiet. Experience outperforms power when it matters most. When his eyes opened, they were focused, alert. No longer just a father on a flight. Something was wrong, and he was running out of time to stay silent. The alarm didn't return, but its absence felt heavier than its sound. The plane pressed forward through turbulent air, engines adjusting in uneven pulses, like a runner struggling to find rhythm. Conversation thinned to whispers. Even the children had gone quiet, sensing the shift adults tried to hide. He stayed still, outwardly unremarkable, but inside his mind worked through layers of possibility. Sensor disagreement, environmental interference, a lag in response time that shouldn't exist at this altitude. He didn't need a panel to tell him something wasn't lining up. The aircraft was talking. Most people just didn't know how to listen. Across the aisle, the man who'd spoken earlier leaned forward again, his knuckles white against the armrest. "My brother flies," he said, voice low, trying to convince himself more than anyone else. "He says modern planes practically fly themselves." "They do," he replied quietly, "until they don't." The words slipped out before he could stop them. Marianne caught them. Her head turned sharply, eyes narrowing. What does that mean? He weighed his response. He'd learned long ago how quickly panic could spread, how responsibility attached itself to the wrong sentences. "It means people matter more than systems," he said instead. She didn't look satisfied, but the plane lurched again, stealing her attention. This time it was followed by a low groan, structural, deep in the body of the aircraft. The sound rippled through the cabin like a held breath finally released. A flight attendant stumbled, catching herself on a seat back. Her smile didn't reach her eyes as she reassured the nearest passengers. Training, he thought, but not the kind that prepares you for this. His daughter shifted, curling closer into his side. He adjusted the thin blanket around her shoulders, a small, careful motion that kept his hands busy. The object tumbled from his jacket pocket then, landing softly at his feet. A worn metal keychain, dulled by time, engraved with a simple winged emblem. He froze for a fraction of a second. Not because it fell, because Marianne noticed it. She bent slightly, peering past her expensive shoes. "You dropped something." "I've got it," he said quickly, scooping it up before she could reach down. His fingers closed around it, thumb brushing the familiar grooves. Habit, memory. He slid it back into his pocket, heartbeat steadying. Her gaze lingered. "That symbol, it looks military." He shrugged, careful. "A lot of things do." The plane dipped again, less sharply, but enough to make the cabin sway. Someone cried out. Someone else laughed too loudly, nerves unraveling. The captain's voice came back, clipped now, urgency barely concealed. Beneath professionalism, they were adjusting course. Passengers should remain seated. Marianne's phone buzzed uselessly in her hand. No signal, no control. The walls she relied on were gone, replaced by aluminum and physics. She exhaled slowly. I hate not knowing what's happening. So does everyone else on this plane, he said. That earned him a look. Not irritation this time, assessment. Across the aisle, an older woman leaned toward him, voice trembling. You sound like you know what you're talking about. He met her eyes, softening his tone. I know how to stay calm. That's not what I meant, she said. He didn't answer. He couldn't. Not yet. The aircraft shuddered once more, then leveled abruptly, throwing several passengers forward against their belts. A sharp warning chime rang out, unmistakable this time, followed by hurried footsteps toward the cockpit. The door stayed closed, but tension leaked through it like smoke. Marianne's composure cracked. She pressed her palms against the armrests, grounding herself the way he had earlier. This airline... She stopped herself, swallowed. Blame wouldn't help. Not now. She looked at him again. Really looked. At the way his eyes tracked the cabin, not frantically but strategically. At how he listened between sounds. At how he hadn't checked a phone or asked for reassurance even once. Who are you? She asked quietly. He considered lying. It would be easier, safer. But the plane jolted again, harder, and the question hung there, heavier than before. I'm a dad, he said. That's what matters. His daughter nodded against his side, as if affirming it. The captain's voice returned, stripped of pretense now. A technical issue. They were troubleshooting. Assistance from the cabin might be required if conditions worsened. A ripple of fear moved through the rows. Marianne's breath caught. She didn't like the way that sounded. She didn't like that the systems she trusted were suddenly asking for help. She looked back at him, the unremarkable man in the middle seat, and something unsettled shifted behind her eyes. Because deep down, she was beginning to suspect the help they needed was already sitting beside her. And the sky outside the window had gone very, very quiet. The quiet outside the window felt unnatural, like the pause before something breaks. Clouds thinned, revealing open sky that should have brought relief, but instead sharpened the sense of exposure. The aircraft hummed unevenly, a living thing struggling to maintain balance. The captain's voice returned again, closer this time, no longer filtered through rehearsed calm. There was an edge to it now, a subtle compression in tone that only a few would notice. They were asking the crew to prepare the cabin, not for landing, for contingencies. Seatbelt signs blinked. A flight attendant moved briskly down the aisle, checking belts, her movements precise but rushed. She stopped briefly beside him and his daughter, offering a practiced smile that faltered when she met his eyes. It lingered there, recognition flickering without understanding. "Everything okay here?" she asked. He nodded. "For now." She hesitated, then moved on. Marianne watched the exchange, her thoughts racing faster than she wanted to admit. She'd sat through countless briefings about safety, redundancy, systems designed to fail safely. She knew the language. She knew the data, but she didn't know this feeling, the one crawling up her spine, telling her something fundamental was off. The plane lurched again, not violent but deliberate, like a correction forced too late. The engines responded out of sync, a staggered surge that set his teeth on edge. He closed his eyes briefly, picturing the systems beneath the floor, the invisible conversations happening between sensors and software. He'd seen this before. Not this exact aircraft, not this airline, But the pattern, the cascade that began small and punished hesitation, the kind of situation where protocol lagged behind reality. Across the cabin, a man stood up despite the signs, panic pushing him past rules. A flight attendant snapped at him to sit down. Voices rose. Fear found sound. "Please," the older woman from earlier whispered toward him. Is this bad?" He chose his words carefully. "It's serious." Her hand trembled as she gripped the armrest. Serious was worse than scary. Serious meant consequences. Marianne swallowed hard. "You keep saying things like that," she said, unable to keep the edge from her voice. "If you know something, say it." He met her gaze, steady. Knowing and explaining aren't the same thing. The aircraft dipped again, sharper this time, then corrected violently. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Somewhere near the front, something fell with a heavy thud. The captain's voice cut in mid-breath. "Cabin crew to stations. Passengers, remain seated." No reassurance this time. The words landed hard. Marianne's control finally slipped. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, breathing shallow. Her phone buzzed again, mocking her with silence. For the first time in years, there was nothing she could do. No call to make. No authority to assert. Her eyes drifted back to him, almost involuntarily. He was still, not rigid. Ready. His daughter shifted, sensing the tension. He pulled her closer, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. The motion was instinctive, protective, but also grounding. He felt her heartbeat, fast but steadying, syncing with his own. The plane shuddered once more, followed by a long, low alarm that didn't cut off this time. It wailed from the front, insistent, undeniable. Crew members exchanged looks as they strapped themselves in. The cockpit door remained closed, but urgency leaked through it now, palpable. Marianne's voice dropped. "They're losing control." He didn't correct her. "They're losing time." That did it. Fear sharpened into clarity. "You keep talking like this isn't hypothetical," she said, "like you've been here before." He looked down at his daughter, brushing hair from her face, then back up. The truth pressed against his ribs, heavy and familiar. "I have," he said quietly. Another violent jolt slammed through the cabin, stronger than any before. A scream broke free somewhere behind them. Oxygen masks rattled in their compartments but didn't deploy. The captain's voice returned, strained now, words clipped by urgency. They were dealing with conflicting data. Manual control was being evaluated. Manual. Marianne's breath caught. She knew enough to understand what that meant at this altitude, in this weather, with this many people aboard. She reached out without thinking, her hand gripping his forearm. "If you know something," she said, barely above a whisper, "you have to tell them." He felt the weight of it. Then, the moment he'd spent years avoiding, the line between staying invisible and stepping forward. "I will," he said, "when they're ready to listen." The plane dipped again, deeper this time, gravity pressing everyone into their seats. Luggage rattled. A child sobbed. Marianne stared at him, disbelief and hope colliding in her chest. "Who are you?" He didn't answer, because the alarm was still sounding, because the cockpit door was about to open, and because the next few minutes were going to decide whether silence remained a choice or became a liability. The cockpit door cracked open just enough to spill tension into the aisle. Voices rushed out first, low and sharp, followed by the captain's strained expression as he scanned the cabin like someone searching for a missing piece. A flight attendant whispered urgently beside him, pointing back toward the rows where unease had settled thick as fog. He felt it then. The shift. The moment when the plane stopped. being a system, and became a room full of people who needed an answer. The captain stepped out fully, bracing himself against the wall as another tremor rolled through the aircraft. "If there's anyone on board with flight or engineering experience," he said, voice carrying despite his attempt to keep it calm, "we need you now." A beat passed, then another. No one moved. Marianne's grip tightened around his arm, not pleading, expectant. Her eyes searched his face, no longer questioning whether he knew something, but whether he would act. Around them, passengers turned, sensing instinctively where gravity had shifted. He exhaled slowly. "I do," he said. The words were quiet, but they cut through the cabin noise like a blade. Heads turned. The captain's gaze snapped toward him, skepticism flashing first, then calculation. "Sir, what's your background?" He stood carefully, keeping his movements unhurried so he wouldn't alarm his daughter. She looked up at him, fear flickering, then trust. He squeezed her shoulder once before stepping into the aisle. "Former test pilot," he said. "Military, flight instruction, systems failure scenarios." The captain didn't smile. He didn't scoff either. He looked relieved. Marianne stared, the last of her assumptions collapsing under their own weight. The man she'd dismissed as an inconvenience was suddenly the most important person on the plane. "Come with me," the captain said. As they moved forward, the cabin parted instinctively, eyes following him with a mix of disbelief and hope. Whispers chased his steps. Test pilot. Military, that guy? He felt exposed in a way he hadn't in years. Not because he was afraid of being judged, but because he'd spent so long making himself small that stepping into the light felt unnatural. Inside the cockpit, alarms pulsed rhythmically, a harsh counterpoint to the tight silence. The first officer rattled off data, hands flying over controls that weren't responding the way they should. Displays disagreed, warnings overlapped. He took it all in at once. "Your sensors are fighting each other," he said calmly. "You've got a false input feeding the automation. It's overcorrecting." The captain blinked. "That's what we thought, but we can't isolate it fast enough." "You don't need to," he replied. "You need to stop listening to it." They stared at him. "Manual control," he continued. "But not fully, partial reversion. Let the stable data lead." The first officer hesitated. That's not standard. He met her eyes. Neither is what's happening. Another jolt rocked the plane. Decision time collapsed. "Do it," the captain said. As controls shifted, the aircraft's response changed. Still rough. Still dangerous. But the violent oscillations softened into something manageable. The alarms didn't stop, but their urgency dulled. A breath passed through the cockpit like a held note, finally released. In the cabin, the change was immediate. Passengers felt it before they understood it. The fear didn't vanish, but it steadied, anchored by the knowledge that someone was finally in control. Marianne stood near the cockpit door, watching through the narrow opening. She saw the way he moved, precise, confident, utterly at home amid chaos. There was no arrogance in it, just fluency. Her chest tightened. She'd built her life around believing authority equaled competence. This was something else entirely. The captain turned to him. "We're stabilizing, but we still need to land." He nodded. "Then let's get you there." Behind them, the cabin buzzed with restrained relief. People clutched armrests, hands, rosaries. Hope spread quietly, fragile but real. And if you want to see how this moment changes everything for the people who thought power came from titles, hit subscribe now, because what comes next is where truth really lands. He glanced once toward the cabin, toward the small figure watching him with unwavering faith. His heart anchored there, even as his mind stayed sharp. This wasn't about proving anything. It was about bringing everyone home. And for the first time since the alarms began, the sky outside the cockpit window looked negotiable. The aircraft responded like a startled animal finally given a steady hand. Not calm, not safe, but willing to cooperate. The nose stopped hunting. The wings steadied into a reluctant equilibrium. The alarms persisted, yet their pitch flattened, no longer climbing toward panic. In the cockpit, breath returned in pieces. He stood between the seats, one hand braced against the console, the other hovering near the trim, eyes scanning without rushing. He wasn't flying the plane. He was listening to it, filtering truth from noise, deciding which voices mattered and which would kill them if obeyed. "Altitude holds fighting us," the first officer said, knuckles tight. "Auto throttles, lagging." "Let it lag," he replied. "It's compensating for bad data. Give it space." The captain nodded, trusting now without needing credentials. Trust was earned in seconds like these, not resumes. Another tremor rippled through the fuselage, gentler than before. In the cabin, fear loosened its grip just enough for people to notice the difference. The crying softened. Whispers turned hopeful. Someone laughed, brittle but alive. Marianne remained near the cockpit doorway, gripping the frame as if it were the last solid thing in the world. She watched the back of his shoulders, the economy jacket stretched across them, the posture unmistakable. This wasn't theory. This was someone who'd lived inside emergencies until they obeyed him. She thought of boardrooms, of delayed flights she'd dismissed with apologies drafted by assistants. None of that mattered now. Inside, the plane lurched once more, then steadied again, as if conceding. He closed his eyes briefly, feeling the rhythm settle into something survivable. "Okay," he said. "Now we plan the landing." The captain swallowed. "Nearest airport's 20 minutes out. Runway length? Marginal. Weather? Improving." He nodded. "We'll make it work." A pause. The first officer glanced at him. "You sure?" He didn't answer immediately. He pictured the runway, the weight, the degraded systems, the margins shaved thin. He pictured a small hand in his, eyes trusting without understanding. "I'm sure enough," he said. They relayed instructions. The plane angled downward, controlled, deliberate. Clouds slid past the windows, no longer boiling chaos but layered gray. The engines held steady, imperfect but loyal. In the cabin, seatbacks creaked as people leaned forward, listening for cues. The flight attendants moved again, voices low, movements careful. Someone began to pray out loud. No one objected. Marianne finally let go of the doorframe. Her legs felt weak. She took a step closer, lowering her voice. "Thank you," she said, unsure who she was thanking or for what. He didn't look back. Not done yet. Minutes stretched. The runway appeared through thinning cloud, lights shimmering in the distance. The aircraft shuddered as they aligned, systems protesting the demand. "Speed's high," the first officer warned. "Bleed it," he said. "Easy." The ground rose. The alarms flared once more, then fell silent as the final configuration locked in. He exhaled slowly, hands steady, mind narrowed to essentials. The wheels hit hard, bounced once, then slammed down again. The cabin erupted in screams that turned into cheers as reverse thrust roared, pressing everyone forward. The runway rushed beneath them, long and unforgiving. "Brakes," he said. They held. The plane slowed, shuddering, then finally rolled to a stop. Silence followed, heavy, unbelieving. Then applause broke out, raw and chaotic, filling every corner of the cabin. People cried openly now, clutched strangers, laughed through shaking breaths. Survival needed expression. In the cockpit, the captain sagged back, hands trembling. "We're down," he said, voice cracking. "We're down." He nodded once, the weight lifting only partially. He stepped back, making room, already receding from the center. That was his nature. Do the job, step aside. Marianne stared at him, eyes bright, something humbled and irrevocable reshaping her. She opened her mouth, then closed it, words inadequate. He turned toward the cabin, toward the aisle that had dismissed him, then needed him, toward the seat where his daughter waited. She stood as he approached, launching herself into his arms without hesitation. He caught her, holding tight, grounding himself in her warmth, her reality. Around them, strangers watched with reverence, understanding dawning too late but arriving all the same. The plane was safe. The silence he'd carried for years was not. And as emergency crews approached outside, lights flashing through the windows, he knew the hardest part wasn't over. Because now, everyone wanted to know who he was. The aircraft sat motionless on the runway, engines winding down with a tired whine, as if even the machine needed a moment to understand it had survived. Outside, emergency vehicles ringed them in flashing red and white, lights bouncing across the cabin walls in restless patterns. Inside, the applause faded into exhausted murmurs, the kind that came only after fear had burned itself out. He didn't move right away. He stayed where he was, arms wrapped around his daughter, feeling the tremor still running through her small body. Her face was buried in his shoulder, breaths uneven but slowing. He counted with her again, quietly, until her grip loosened just enough to remind him she was okay. Only then did he look up. Every eye near them was turned his way, not curious now, grateful, awed. A few people nodded as if they'd just witnessed something sacred and didn't quite know how to react. Someone whispered thank you. Someone else reached out, touched his sleeve, then pulled their hand back as if unsure permission had been given. He gently guided his daughter back into her seat and crouched in front of her, lowering his voice. "Stay here. I'll be right back." She nodded, trusting him without question. At the front of the cabin, the cockpit door was fully open now. The captain stood just outside it, one hand braced against the wall, the other running through his hair. His uniform was rumpled, his authority stripped of polish but not of respect. "You saved us," the captain said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. He shook his head. "We did it together." The captain didn't argue. He simply nodded, eyes shining, and stepped aside as emergency responders began coordinating through the doorway. Marianne hovered a few steps back, frozen between worlds. The cabin she once ruled by, Proxy had transformed into something raw and honest, and she no longer knew where she stood inside it. When he finally looked at her, she straightened instinctively, old habits flaring even now. She stopped, tried again. "I owe you more than an apology." He studied her not unkindly. "You don't owe me anything." "That's not true," she said quietly. "I judged you, I dismissed you, and I was wrong." Her voice carried just enough to reach the surrounding passengers. Heads turned. The moment expanded, public whether she intended it to be or not. He considered deflecting. He always did. But something in him shifted, subtle and firm. This wasn't about embarrassment or revenge. It was about truth. "You weren't wrong to assume," he said evenly. "You were wrong to stop there." The words landed, not sharp, clear. She swallowed. "I don't want to be that person." "Then don't be," he replied. Silence stretched, thick with understanding. She nodded slowly, accepting the rebuke without argument. It was the first time in years she hadn't tried to control the narrative. Emergency personnel began boarding. Voices efficient, practiced. One of them glanced at him, recognition flickering. "Sir, we're going to need a statement." He nodded. "Of course." As they worked through the cabin, checking passengers, offering water and blankets, the energy shifted again. Relief settled into exhaustion. People slumped back into seats, adrenaline draining away. Marianne watched him interact with the responders, calm, cooperative, never claiming more credit than necessary. She noticed the way he redirected praise, the way he made space for others. It unsettled her more than arrogance ever could. She followed him down the aisle when the initial rush eased. "What happens now?" she asked. He glanced toward his daughter, who was sipping water offered by a flight attendant. "Now we wait, then we go home." She hesitated. "That's it?" He gave a small smile. "That's enough." She looked around the cabin one last time, seeing it differently now. Not as a temporary inconvenience, but as a place where lives had intersected, where hierarchy had collapsed under pressure. "I'd like to talk," she said carefully, "when things settle, about everything." He considered it. Not for her sake, but for his own, for his daughter, for the possibility that this moment might ripple outward instead of fading into a story retold and forgotten. "Maybe," he said. That was more than she'd expected. Outside, the rain had stopped. Through the windows, the sky looked lighter, as if it too had exhaled. The runway glistened under emergency lights, no longer threatening, just wet pavement leading forward. As passengers began to disembark in stages, people paused beside him, thanking him softly, awkwardly, sincerely. He accepted each with a nod, never lingering, never performing. When it was their turn, he took his daughter's hand and stepped into the aisle again. This time, no one looked past him. They looked at him, and as they walked toward the open door, the weight of what had happened finally settled. Not as pride, but as something steadier. Dignity, reclaimed. Not announced, not demanded, simply seen. The jet bridge hummed underfoot as they stepped off the plane, the metallic echo blending with distant voices and the hiss of rain finally retreating beyond the glass. The terminal lights felt too bright after the dim tension of the cabin, exposing faces still pale with aftershock. People moved slower here, as if gravity hadn't quite reset. He kept his daughter close, her hand wrapped around his fingers, her steps careful but determined. She glanced back once at the aircraft, now surrounded by personnel, then up at him. He nodded, a silent promise that it was over. Behind them, Marianne emerged from the plane last, heels in hand, jacket draped over one arm. She looked smaller, without the altitude, without the authority of titles and seating charts. Still composed, but altered. Her eyes tracked him instinctively, as if the world had quietly rearranged itself, and he was now a fixed point she couldn't ignore. Emergency responders directed passengers into a holding area. Blankets were offered, water pressed into trembling hands. Reporters hadn't arrived yet, but their absence felt temporary, like a breath held before noise. A supervisor approached him, clipboard in hand, voice respectful. "Sir, we'll need to debrief you formally. The airline will also—" He raised a hand gently. "Later. My daughter first." The man nodded immediately, stepping back without question. Marianne watched that exchange, something tightening in her chest. Deference given not because of rank, but because of clarity. She followed at a distance as he settled his daughter into a chair, kneeling to her level again, brushing stray hair from her forehead. "You were brave," he told her. She shook her head. You were. He smiled, small and genuine. We both were. Nearby, a few passengers hovered, unsure whether to interrupt. Gratitude pulled them forward anyway. A man clasped his shoulder, voice thick. A woman whispered a prayer over his hands. He accepted it all quietly, never lingering, always redirecting attention back to the people around him. Marianne finally stepped closer. I spoke with the captain, she said. There will be conversations, internally, publicly. He looked up at her, expression neutral. About what? About systems, training, and about you. She hesitated. They'll want to make this right. He rose slowly, meeting her eye level. This isn't about compensation or positions. I know, she said quickly. That's why it matters. The truth of that landed between them. For the first time, she wasn't trying to fix a problem. She was trying to understand one. Around them, the terminal buzzed with low conversation, relief mixing with disbelief. Phones lit up now, signals restored, messages flooding in. The story was already escaping containment. If you're still here, subscribe now, because what happens next isn't about applause. It's about what real accountability looks like after the crisis fades. He glanced toward the windows where dawn was beginning to push through thinning clouds. The sky looked ordinary again. That felt like a gift. Marianne followed his gaze. You could have stayed invisible, she said softly. You chose not to. He considered that. I chose my daughter. She nodded, absorbing it. I've spent years believing power was something you hold. Tonight showed me it's something you earn, and something you can lose. Then maybe it wasn't wasted, he said. A call came over the terminal speakers, directing passengers to temporary accommodations. The supervisor returned, confirming arrangements. Everything moved, forward, orderly again. Marianne extended her hand, not as an executive, as a person. Thank you, she said simply. He took it briefly. Do better, he replied. She didn't flinch. I intend to. As they parted, she stood watching him walk away, the single dad with the steady stride, the child leaning into his side. No entourage, no recognition demanded. Just presence. Around her, people resumed their lives, already turning the experience into something they could explain. But she stayed still, letting it change her. Because she knew now, somewhere between the cabin alarms and the quiet terminal light, that the people society overlooks are often the ones holding everything together, and the cost of forgetting that was far higher than she'd ever calculated. The terminal began to thin as passengers were guided toward shuttles and temporary lounges, relief slowly transforming into logistics. The noise softened into background hum, the crisis already being folded into procedures and paperwork. He stayed near the window, watching dawn claim more of the sky, his daughter seated beside him, legs swinging gently as if testing whether the world had truly steadied. She leaned against him, eyelids heavy now that fear had released its grip. He rested his chin lightly on her hair, breathing in the familiar scent of shampoo and recycled air, grounding himself in something real. Around them, strangers moved past with glances that lingered, respect mixed with curiosity, but no one pushed too hard. Not yet. Marianne stood across the terminal, speaking quietly with airline officials. Her posture was different now, less rigid, as if some internal brace had been removed. She listened more than she spoke, nodding slowly, eyes occasionally flicking back toward him, as if recalibrating her sense of scale. A uniformed representative approached him again, careful, deferential. Sir, when you're ready, we'll need to document what happened in the cockpit. He nodded. I'll help however I can. The man hesitated. "There will be attention, media, questions." "I figured," he said calmly. Attention had never scared him. What came with it sometimes did. As he stood, his daughter reached for his sleeve. "You're coming back?" "Always," he said, squeezing her hand. He guided her toward a nearby attendant, who offered a blanket and a gentle smile, then turned back toward the conference room where the airline staff waited. Inside, the air was cooler, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly. A table sat in the center, scattered with tablets and folders. The captain was already there, eyes tired but brightening when he saw him. "Good to see you upright," the captain said. "Likewise." They spoke through the sequence methodically, stripping emotion away in favor of clarity, censored discrepancies, automation conflicts. The moment control had been wrestled back from bad data. Heads nodded, notes were taken. No one interrupted when he spoke. Marianne watched from the far side of the room, arms folded loosely, absorbing the reality behind the incident reports she'd approved 100 times before without reading closely enough. This time, she didn't look away. When it ended, the room sat in quiet for a moment. Finally, one of the executives cleared his throat. "We'd like to formally recognize," he raised a hand. "Recognition isn't necessary." Marianne stepped forward then. "What is necessary," she said, voice steady, "is change. We were lucky tonight. Luck isn't a strategy." The room shifted. This wasn't the usual post-incident script. She continued, eyes moving between the captain and the others. "We rely on systems and hierarchy. Tonight reminded us that expertise doesn't always sit where we expect it to. That needs to be reflected in how we train, how we listen, and how we treat people." He felt something loosen in his chest. Not relief, validation. Afterward, he returned to the terminal where his daughter waited, cheeks flushed with sleep. She looked up as he approached, smile immediate and bright. "Did you fix it?" she asked. "We helped," he corrected gently. She nodded, satisfied. Outside, buses idled, ready to move people on. The sun was fully up now, casting long shadows across the tarmac. The plane that had carried them through fear sat quiet and harmless, just another machine again. Marianne approached one last time, stopping a respectful distance away. "I meant what I said earlier," she told him. "I want to do better, not just for tonight." He studied her, weighing sincerity against habit. He saw exhaustion there, but also resolve. "Then start by remembering this," he said. "When things go wrong, look beyond the obvious. Power doesn't always announce itself." She nodded. "I won't forget." They parted without ceremony. No promises, no numbers exchanged. Just an understanding carried forward. As he boarded the shuttle with his daughter, he felt the ripple spreading outward, subtle but real. Conversations had shifted. Assumptions had cracked. The victory wasn't applause or offers. It was space created for different voices to be heard next time, before alarms ever sounded. He sat by the window again, watching the airport recede, feeling the quiet satisfaction of having done what was necessary and nothing more. The crisis was over. What remained was change in motion, fragile but alive, moving forward with them into the ordinary morning. The shuttle rolled away from the terminal in a slow, deliberate arc, tires hissing against damp pavement. Inside, passengers sat scattered, wrapped in blankets, holding cups of lukewarm coffee like proof that life had resumed. Conversation stayed muted, respectful, as if no one wanted to disturb the fragile calm settling over them. He sat near the back with his daughter, her head resting against his arm now, sleep finally claiming her. The adrenaline had drained. leaving behind a deep, bone-level fatigue he hadn't felt in years. It reminded him of long nights after missions, when silence arrived, heavy and earned. Through the window, the airport shrank into a lattice of lights and steel. Somewhere back there, reports were being filed, statements polished, narratives shaped. He knew how that worked. Stories liked clean edges. Heroes liked simple arcs. This one wouldn't be simple. The shuttle stopped at a temporary hotel designated for delayed passengers. Doors opened. Cool morning air rushed in, carrying the smell of wet asphalt and brewing coffee. One by one, people disembarked, stretching stiff limbs, blinking against daylight. A man paused beside him, hesitant. "Hey," he said quietly, "I just wanted to say, my wife doesn't fly well. You kept us calm, thank you." He nodded. "I'm glad you're both okay." Another person followed, and then another. Gratitude arrived in small, careful doses, never overwhelming, never demanding. He accepted it the way he always had, without ownership. Inside the hotel lobby, staff moved efficiently, distributing keycards and instructions. The ordinary rhythm of service felt surreal after the intensity of the night. Carpet underfoot, soft music. The faint clink of dishes from a breakfast area being prepared. He checked in, balancing his daughter on one hip as the clerk worked quickly, eyes flicking up with recognition, then away, professional. No fuss. He appreciated that. The elevator ride was quiet. A couple stood behind them, still pale but smiling faintly. The doors opened. Hallway lights glowed warm and forgiving. Once inside the room, he set his daughter gently on the bed, shoes still on, blanket tucked around her shoulders. She stirred, mumbled something unintelligible, then slept on. He sat on the edge of the bed for a long moment, hands resting on his knees, listening to her breathe. Only then did the weight fully land. He leaned back, against the wall, sliding down until he was seated on the carpet. His pulse slowed. Muscles unclenched. The part of him that had stayed locked and ready finally stood down. Memories surfaced uninvited. Simulators screaming. Instructors watching. Skies that demanded perfection and punished hesitation. He'd walked away from that world because the cost had become too high, because someone else needed him more. Tonight had reminded him that leaving didn't erase who he was. A soft knock came at the door. He rose, careful not to wake his daughter, and opened it a crack. Marianne stood there, jacket gone, hair pulled back loosely, looking more human than executive for the first time. "I won't stay long," she said. "I just needed to say something without an audience." He stepped aside, letting her in. She looked around the modest room, taking in the small details. The child's backpack, the scuffed shoes by the door. Her expression softened. "I've spent my career making decisions based on charts and forecasts," she said. "I thought that was responsibility." "And now?" he asked. "Now I realize responsibility also means knowing when you don't know enough." She met his eyes. Tonight exposed gaps I didn't want to see. He folded his arms loosely. "Seeing them is the start." She nodded. "I've already ordered an internal review, not for blame, for listening. We got lucky tonight because you were there. I don't want luck to be our safety net." He studied her, searching for performative polish. He found none. Just resolve, still forming, but real. "That's good," he said. She exhaled, tension easing. "I don't expect forgiveness or gratitude. I just wanted you to know this won't be forgotten." He glanced toward the bed, where his daughter slept peacefully. "Then make it mean something." "I will." They stood in silence for a moment, the hum of the hotel filling the space between them. Finally, she, stepped back toward the door. "I hope our paths don't cross again under circumstances like these," she said, managing a small smile. "So do I." When she left, he closed the door gently and returned to the bed, sitting beside his daughter again. Outside, morning traffic began to stir, the world resuming its routines. He lay back on the second bed, staring at the ceiling, exhaustion pulling at him. There would be follow-ups, questions, maybe offers he didn't want. But for now, there was just this quiet room, a sleeping child, and the knowledge that when the moment came, he'd stepped forward. Not for recognition, for family. And that, he knew, was the only reason that ever mattered. Morning settled fully by the time he woke, light spilling through the thin hotel curtains in pale bands across the carpet. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then memory returned in layers. The alarms, the runway, the silence afterward. His body stiffened reflexively, then eased when he heard the soft, steady breathing beside him. His daughter lay sprawled across the bed, blanket kicked halfway to the floor, hair a wild halo against the pillow. Peaceful, unaware of how close fear had come. He watched her for a long minute, letting that sight recalibrate him more effectively than sleep ever could. A phone buzzed on the nightstand. He frowned. He hadn't given the number to many people. He silenced it without looking, not ready yet. The world could wait another few minutes. He showered quietly, the hot water grounding him further, washing away the residue of adrenaline. When he emerged, wrapped in a towel, his daughter was sitting up, rubbing her eyes. "Are we home?" she asked. "Not yet," he said gently. "Soon." She nodded, accepting that answer easily. Children trusted continuity more than location. They dressed, simple movements, practiced efficiency. He packed their things slowly, checking twice out of habit, the same habit that had once kept him alive, in less forgiving places. When they stepped into the hallway, voices echoed faintly from other rooms. Passengers waking, lives resuming. In the lobby, a small cluster of reporters had gathered behind a cordon. Not many yet, but enough. Cameras lifted when they spotted him. A murmur spread. He felt it then, the pull of narrative closing in. He stopped. His daughter's hand tightened in his. "Daddy?" He crouched to her level. "We're going to walk past them. You don't have to say anything." "Okay." He stood, shoulders squared, posture calm, not defensive, not inviting, just present. As they passed, questions flew, names, background. How did it feel? Was he scared? Did he consider himself a hero? He didn't break stride. "No comments," he said once, evenly. They exited into daylight, the air cool and clean after rain. A shuttle waited. He loaded their bags, buckled her in, then sat beside her as the doors closed. Only when the hotel fell away behind them did his shoulders lower again. Inside the terminal later, airline staff moved with a new kind of attentiveness. Not deferential, respectful. People nodded as he passed. Some smiled. No one dismissed him. Marianne stood near a departure board, waiting. She looked different again, back in tailored clothes, posture composed, but something fundamental had shifted. When she saw him, she didn't rush forward. She waited until he approached on his own terms. "I won't keep you," she said. "I just wanted to tell you something before you go." He listened. "I issued a directive this morning," she continued. "Any crew member can now escalate safety concerns directly, without hierarchy slowing them down. We're revising training to include outside expertise protocols." And she hesitated. "I used last night as the case study." He absorbed that quietly. "That's a start," he said. She nodded. "It is, and it's not the end." A pause stretched. The departure board chimed. softly behind them. She added, "They asked me if I wanted to control the story." "And?" he asked. "I told them the story doesn't belong to me." Something eased in his chest at that. His daughter tugged his sleeve. "Can we get breakfast?" He smiled down at her. "Yeah, we can." Marianne watched the exchange, something like regret flickering briefly across her face. Not personal, but systemic. "You taught me something," she said quietly, "about what leadership looks like when it's real." He met her gaze. "Then pass it on." She nodded once, decisive. "I will." They parted there, no handshake this time. No need. At the gate, he bought breakfast. Simple, overpriced, perfect in its ordinariness. His daughter chatted about pancakes, about clouds, about how the plane had been loud but brave. He listened, anchoring himself in the present, letting the past stay where it belonged. When they boarded the next flight, smaller, quieter, he noticed something. Immediately, the crew greeted everyone the same way. Eye contact, patience, no assumptions. They took their seats. He buckled her in, checked twice, then leaned back as the plane prepared to taxi. No alarms, no flicker of lights, just motion. As the aircraft lifted smoothly into the sky, he felt no tension, only gratitude. Around them, people read, slept, scrolled. Ordinary lives moving forward. He glanced out the window once, watching the ground fall away, then turned back to his daughter, who had already pressed her face to the glass, smiling. Whatever came next, offers, questions, stories, it would be handled the same way he'd handled everything else. With calm, with clarity, and with the quiet certainty that dignity, once reclaimed, didn't need defending. It only needed to be lived. The flight landed without ceremony, tires kissing the runway so gently his daughter barely looked up from the window. No applause followed, no collective breath released. Just the soft deceleration of a normal arrival, the kind most people forgot the moment it happened. He smiled at that. They stepped into the terminal with the rest of the passengers, blending easily into the flow of rolling bags and murmured conversations. No cameras waited here, no officials hovered. This airport didn't know what had happened the night before, and that was fine. The world didn't need to stop to acknowledge quiet truths. His daughter skipped a step ahead, energized again, pointing at signs and shops, already weaving the story into something manageable and child-sized. He let her talk, nodding, answering when needed, grateful for the ordinariness wrapping around them like a blanket. At a small cafe near the gate, they sat with paper cups of juice and a shared muffin. Crumbs dusted the table. Outside the tall windows, planes moved in clean, predictable lines, choreography restored. "You're not flying planes anymore, right?" she asked suddenly. "No," he said. "That part of my life's done." She thought about that, brow furrowed. "But you still know how." "Yes." She smiled, satisfied. "That's good." He watched her eat, watched the way children accepted complexity without needing to conquer it. Knowing didn't always mean doing. Strength didn't always mean using it. Around them, strangers passed without a second glance. No one knew who he was, no one needed to. The victory hadn't been about being seen everywhere. It had been about being seen where it mattered, by the people who'd looked past him, by the system that had nearly failed, by his child who would carry the memory forward. Their boarding group was called. They gathered their things and walked down the jet bridge, metal walls echoing softly. He felt no tension this time, no scanning, no calculation. Just the steady awareness that if something went wrong again, he would handle it. And if it didn't, he would simply be a father on a flight. They took their seats. The engines hummed. The plane pushed back. As they lifted into the sky, smooth and uneventful, he thought about Marianne, about the meeting room she would walk into differently now, about the policies that might change because someone had listened instead of dismissed. The ripple would be subtle, invisible to most, but real. That was enough. He leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment, letting the vibration of flight pass through him without resistance. The part of him that had once lived for altitude and edge no longer demanded the center. It simply existed, integrated, at peace. His daughter nudged him. "You okay?" "Yeah," he said. "I'm good." She nodded and turned back to the window, forehead pressed to the glass, watching clouds slide past like slow dreams. The world would keep sorting people into categories. It always did. But somewhere, in a cockpit manual revised, in a meeting where someone spoke up sooner, in a child who learned that calm could be stronger than loud authority, something had shifted. He didn't need to follow the ripple to know it was there. As the plane leveled off, sunlight poured across the cabin, warm and forgiving. He felt a quiet certainty settle in his chest. Not pride, not relief, but alignment. He had lived his values when tested. He had protected what mattered. He had refused to let dignity be conditional. That was the ending he wanted. And as the aircraft carried them forward into an ordinary sky, he understood something simple and unshakable. Real power doesn't announce itself. It shows up when needed, and then it lets life go on. If you want another story like this, tell me the next title you want me to tackle. Subscribe, and don't miss our next story. Single dad janitor solved 100 minimizer problem in seconds. What the CEO did next shocked the whole company. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?